you, and that the nights in the lead up to the release of the blueprint of the financial health, essentially, of South Africa's economy have involved a lot of sleepless nights, so we thank you. But sir, as you said, right now we need to be building on, can you hear me correctly? As you said in your speech yesterday, so we need to build on the positive momentum underpinning the South African economy. Since yourselves and your colleagues formed the Government of National Unity in June, and since the colleagues over at Eskom have kept the lights on in the economy for the past 7 months. I do appreciate that those of you who have attended these sessions before know that it is an opportunity for you to engage the Minister on his plans to grow the economy, as well as the manner in which he is hoping that you partner with him this time around, and the extension or invitation rather to engage the Minister also extending to the colleagues who are joining us on LinkedIn Live. Good morning to you. Please do send through your feedback or any questions that you might have. Send them through virtually. They will reach us, as well as the members of the media who are in the room. With those few words, I would like to welcome on stage our first speaker for today, who will give us the official welcome, representing the host, of course, the main host of today's event, Rand Merchant Bank. That is the Chief Economist of the bank, Mr. Isaah Mhlanga. Isaah, over to you, sir.
Good morning, Honorable Minister Godongwana, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. Masonto, the SARS Commissioner, the DG, and all officials of National Treasury and SARS that are here today. Good morning also to all of you, our valued clients, and the public at large that are streaming online. I just want to make 3 points in recognizing and thanking the National Treasury. We are always asked, do you view the budget from an investor perspective or from the need to fulfill social needs of the country? And in true nature, we ask why not both? But also we saw this from your own commitment. Last night you were at the APSIP dinner, you stayed until late. Today you are here in the morning after a long period of working on the budget, and I was tempted to think you also thought, why not both? Having said that, we are seeing a lot of change globally. To strike a budget that is well balanced, that still puts the needs of many South Africans at the same time making sure that investors are confident in South Africa's prospects, again, reinforces we can do both. So it is my singular honor to welcome all of you. Let's engage all the difficult questions to the Treasury team. They have a lot of smart people, technically so. I know so because I used to be a Treasury as well. So I always wear that former Treasury hat in one way or the other. We are in partnership with the Sunday Times and Kokeli Advisory, so I'm going to give a brief opportunity for them to say a word or two before we go into the main discussion for the day. Thank you very much. We are honored to be graced by your presence today. It's an early morning in Cape Town. I hear in Cape Town people don't like early mornings, but the room is full. So thank you for your presence. And hopefully you're going to find the engagement quite fruitful and enriching. And lastly, before I step off, it is a client event, but in true spirit, we thought the public also needs to hear deliberations directly from the minister and his team. So again, why not both? Thank you very much.
Okay, as Isaah did mention, this is an event in which we do have two hosts, and representing the Sunday Times, I would like to welcome on stage the Managing Director of the Arena Group, in which the Sunday Times does fall under, Mr. Lyndon Barons to build on the welcome remark. Thank you, sir. A warm applause for him too as well.
This is good to be back home. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Minister, Deputy Minister, Commissioner, the DGs and treasurers, and everybody that's working within the department. It's really an honor for us to be part of something like this. In actual fact, tomorrow, the 1st of November, will be 5 years since we as a new group have been in control of Sunday Times, Business Day, Financial Mail, and we have TV and radio and film. And so it's a great time for us to be part of it. And it was interesting when we chose the name Arena, right? It is like a stadium, an amphitheater, a village square, a town square, if you can imagine, because it's always open to scrutiny. It's about truth and honesty. It's about people watching what you are doing within that amphitheater or within that environment. But it's also being able to bring diverse people and thinking together. So when we constructed the name Arena, it was with that in mind that we really connect everyone and we engage. And so being part of this, the post-budget analysis or chat about it, it's also in line with our ethos, is being able to make sure that we inform, we educate, but above all, as a media group, that we also inspire the nation. And so the Sunday Times really is the paper for the people. And we said that all our platforms must be platforms of hope. And so we are very pleased to partner with RMB on this and being able to engage in this manner. So we encourage you to have a great time today, and we encourage you to put on your thinking caps or hats, I should say, today as we enjoy the time together. Thank you so much.
I'm hearing a few snooze alarms or alarm clocks or whatnot that are going off right now. Kindly just make sure that you've got your phones on silent. Do use them, though, just to engage even to your community on social media, your various platform of choice. As I did say, that this is live on LinkedIn, and so feel free also to tell a couple of stories there as well. And now we are going to hear from, as I did tease, that Mkhokheli Advisory also part of the hosting today, and we'll hear from an individual whose Sunday column you don't want to be in for the wrong reasons. He's a writer who certainly doesn't hold back any punches or mince his words. Minister, good luck. We'll see what happens on Sunday. But I'd just like to welcome on stage Mr. Sam Mkhokheli just to share a few words as well.
I had to bring my phone just to make sure I time myself. I've got to deliver this in 60 seconds. Good morning, everyone. And sadly, the finance minister is the Kaizer Chiefs supporter. He hasn't won anything, just like me, in over a decade. The commissioner of SARS is also very close to Kaizer Chiefs and Man U. They've been long suffering, and I worry, when they do the numbers, are they really set on helping us achieve greater things? And when people are so used to 1.8% GDP growth, and then they keep telling you, no, we'll do 2% maybe at some stage. I'm also standing behind this beautiful construct here so that I could hide my public debt. The minister's public debt is so comfortable with 75%. Is that enough? How long are we going to do this? I'm so grateful that the Director General is a doctor, not like Dr. Khumalo. Dr. Khumalo will forgive me. Wonderful youngster. Also a good demonstration of the skills in South Africa. The National Treasury, we could give them a round of applause for their ability to churn out good quality public servants that give us a whole lot of hope. Thankfully, the teams at the Treasury, the Ministry, the Communications team, the SARS team, RMB have made this wonderful. Why we put the public and the private together? Because we want factual, hard conversation. Don't make it easy for them that because they are in the room. 1.6, 1.8% growth is nothing in global terms. Please make it hard for them. Thank you.
So I thought he'd wait until Sunday to tell his brutal truth, but yeah, as I said, clearly not one to mince his words. I think you were a little bit harsh there, withstanding the environment in which we're in. Some of the colleagues whose commentary I've had the pleasure to read in the past 24 hours say that it is commendable within the constructs, but of course it's far from the the latest target that the administration, I think it's President Ramaphosa, delivered in terms of a 3% target or so for growth in the medium term. So, quite a lot of work to deliver there. But as I said, I have had the pleasure of reading some of the commentary that some colleagues in this room, physically as well as those virtually, have written in the wake of your budget. And as you know, it goes... the media industry goes out and consults various experts in the field just to rate the minister's budget. The lowest score I saw, sir, I gave you a 5 out of 10. That was a score that was concerned around fiscal slippage. The highest score that I did see rating the minister's midterm budget was 8 out of 10. And that was a score that just reflected on the positivity and the encouragement of the fact that you're using the additional money to plow into infrastructure to push the economy forward. So I did my maths with my very limited capabilities, and I think that's around an average of 6.75, sir, which means you passed. But the road ahead is a difficult one because the sixth administration is wanting you to achieve 3.3%. And so perhaps an invitation to reflect on maybe some of the things that you didn't get to say in the budget as you did deliver to the public yesterday, but maybe a more intimate and nuanced message for your respective colleagues in the private sector whom you have asked to partner with you in taking South Africa forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, could I kindly ask that we give a very, very warm welcome to the Finance Minister of South Africa, Minister Enoch Godongwana.
I think Sam Kokelo was unfair to me. There's a winning side. On the rugby side, I'm doing well. Sharks is doing well. Sharks is doing well. DG, Deputy Minister, the other Deputy Minister is in London. He's joined the JSE group in London. So I've got 2 deputies now. I've got the commissioner. A taxpayer is always a tax collector is always a tax collector. When we are coming in here, it says, how many of them are paying tax? And yesterday he was telling me that in the 2-port system, people went there for assessment for their 2-port system, and he discovered some of them owe him in the first place. So he would take his normal tax and then go and collect his debt from the same people. Did quite well. He's got a substantial amount out of that. That's the tax man. You know, I'm not going to say something new. I'm going to reiterate what I said yesterday. But before doing that, I watched a number of people saying a number of things. Some of them, I said, I've not said anything about unemployment in a country which has got unemployment. I've not said anything about poverty. And somebody said, hey, this man, one of them said, probably not talking about the country I'm living in. Somebody said, what about debt? The IMF said they must put a debt ceiling of 77%. I said, no, people are missing my story. They're missing my story. My story is simply this. South Africa has a growth problem. If you've got a growing economy, you will solve the problem of unemployment, you will solve the problem of poverty. So South Africa has got a growth problem. If you have got a growing economy, you'll solve the problem of debt. There's nothing about debt. The debt is not about its size. It's the capacity of the economy to service that debt. If you are trying to say South Africa must sit at 77%, most of the other countries, particularly in the developing world, are more than 100% debt to GDP. And nobody worries about that. Why? Because those economies have the capacity to service the debt. So, what was my message? That's what I'm trying to say, which people are missing. My message was that South Africans, we've got a growth problem. We've got to refocus on growth. And I was answering somebody this morning in a television interview. All of these things has got to be done by government. I said, no. No, if you look at the 16 million people employed in South Africa, government also employed about 1.2 million. The rest is the private sector. So what can the government contribute to this growth challenge? That's my message. How does government contribute to this growth problem? We've got a growth problem for more than a decade. We've been stagnant. So we've got to mobilize South Africans to think differently. That to solve most of the problems we're talking about, we've got to grow the economy. Whether it's unemployment, whether it's poverty, whether it's debt, we've got to grow the economy. That's my story, which I want to repeat today to clarify it. That's my story. We then said, for us as National Treasury to contribute to that growth story, for us to contribute to that growth story, we've got 4 pillars. That's our contribution. It's not the end. Other people will do other things. The first one is to create a conducive environment via macroeconomic stability. That's what we said. That's the first of our pillars. The second pillar we're talking about, state capacity. If the state can't function, can't get a basic thing, you can't get a road, you can't get electricity, you can't get anything, state capacity is critical in conducive to that environment for growth and investment. The state capacity of the state is the second thing we said. The third thing we said is structural reforms. Structural reforms. Structural reforms, put simply in a layman's language, to remove bottlenecks in the economy. That's what it does. Stripped of all jargon, it will remove bottlenecks in the economy. And through Operation Vulindlela, we've been doing a lot of that, focusing on electricity, focusing on logistics. And some people are asking me about Transnet. I said, we can't follow ESCOM as we deal with Transnet. ESCOM is a bad template to follow. Why do I say so? We focused on fixing ESCOM than fixing power to the grid. Those are two different things. We spent almost 16 years trying to fix ESCOM than fix power to the grid. That's a bad template. In the case of Transnet, we're saying we're going to do two things. We're going to fix Transnet, but we're going to fix the logistics system as a whole. What does that mean? What that means is that we've got to get, rather than be held at ransom by Transnet, to get other operators to provide the same logistic thing. And somebody was saying, are you privatizing? I said, no, I'm not privatizing. I'm doing a simple thing. I'm introducing competition into the sector than having a monopoly in the logistics sector. The whole range of these examples, we can cite them, of these structural reforms. Our last pillar is a shifting composition of expenditure. Shifting composition of expenditure from consumption to capital investment. under difficult circumstances, because in an environment with a lot of unemployment, poverty, and so on, people tend to say we focus on one aspect of this, but on redistribution. I remember after the unbanning of the ANC, before we went into government, there was a whole range of debate, growth through redistribution, growth with redistribution, a debate full of people involved debating all these concepts. As if you can do redistribution without growth, you can't. We've been focusing on redistribution, which has consumed more resources than is necessary. We've got to grow the economy, otherwise we're going to run out of resources to redistribute. So shift that composition of expenditure towards investment in capital. That's our story. That's our story. That I want to re-emphasize here. But that macroeconomic stability presupposes that while we are growing this economy, we've got to contain our debt service cost. They consume more than any other item of expenditure at the moment at 388 billion rand. We've got to manage that so that we should have space to spend on other things, including on investing in infrastructure. That's that composition of expenditure. Without containing the debt service cost, shifting the composition of expenditure is not going to be an easy task. That's my story, Fifi. Can I sit down? Would you like to? That's my story, which we were trying to communicate yesterday. You can't deal with unemployment, you can't deal with poverty, you can't deal with any of these things if you're not, you can't deal with that because the economy is not growing. So that's the story we need to build. That's the story how to work together to deal with those issues. That's largely the message we're communicating yesterday. The rest of the staff, whether it's local government, whether it's anything else, are part of this bigger story of growth. Thank you.
For reiterating that story, and perhaps then as colleagues in the room, as well as those who are joining us virtually, we can help the Minister in building on that story, on solving for the growth problem in this country. He laid the plan for the government of national unity, and now it's a response or an opportunity for us to just add to that plan. Come through.
Yeah.
Come through.
I forgot one piece.
No problems.
A number of people were asking the question, was it that easy to do a budget in the context of the government of national unity? That was the easiest thing to do. There are other difficulties in the government of national unity, where there's NHI, where there's local government, where there's localization, all of those things. The easiest thing to do was the budget. We have what is called the minister's budget, minister's committee on budget. And the three major parties are represented there in that committee. Not a single dissenting voice, because we are agreed on the strategic thrust of fiscal consolidation, all of us. We may disagree on the pace of that fiscal consolidation, but we are agreed. But why a government of national unity, not a grand coalition? When we were discussing as ANC trying to form a government, we went to all parties with no exception. without exception. The EFF said, form a grand coalition with us. As we don't want the DA, we don't want the FFF plus. The DA said, form a grand coalition with us. We don't want the EFF in the and MK. Went to the MK. The MK said, form with us. We don't want any of these people. Maybe the EFF, but without Cyril. That was also and their other condition. Without Cyril. It's a bad ex-CEO. That's the language they used. But the government of national unity is more important than a grand coalition. Because if you look at in the run-up to the elections, our society was fractured along racial, class, all these cleavages. You needed to build a unit of peoples. That was the focus the ANC had in mind with the government of national unity. And I think we have achieved that. The positive sentiment that has come out as a result of the government of national unity is quite impressive. It's quite impressive. And forget about the newspaper party. We're working very well. We're working very well. Forget about the newspaper clippings and so on. We do irritate each other here and there. There will always be that irritation because we're not coming from the same stable. But it does not mean that on substantive issues, we're not on the same page. That's what has been encouraging in the government of national unity. I think despite what analysts say, Mhlanga, this thing is going to last for the next 5 years. Mark my words. It's going to carry on until, because at least those that are in cabinet, of course, our parties outside are an irritation for both of us. But inside those of us in government, there's a commitment to make this thing work and deliver. So in that sense, the government of national unity is working, is fine. On the budget side, there's a unit of purpose. On fiscal consolidation and so on, we may disagree on minor detail, how fast do we do it, and so on. But we're on the same page. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister, for setting that record straight. So as I said, Sam, they said, where's Sam? They said that we must forget about what you guys write. Lyndon, sorry, we must forget about you. There's absolute consensus here. But as I said, the Minister has shared his story, the story of South Africa right now. Fantastic country. In fact, in my view, one of the most beautiful in the world. If you've had the opportunity to travel, I think that you'll agree with me. But we have a growth problem. And so we are going to get into a discussion on how we solve for it. What in the budget that was presented yesterday is going to be the elements that help us solve for that problem, and what else perhaps needs to be included for us to get on a more firm growth path. And so can I welcome on stage with me to converse the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, who is excited about AI and its capacity to determine who in this room is paying their taxes or not. Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, sir, please come through on stage. Also, Carmen Nel, the head of multi-asset at Terebinth Capital, as well as Isaah, if I can ask you to rejoin us on stage, please. Okay. Oh, you're giving a presentation. Oh, this is wonderful. All right. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So good morning. Sanibonani, Molweni, Goeiemorgen. Yeah, we have a growth opportunity, which is the flip side of a growth problem, which if we don't grasp it, we'll remain stuck in this conundrum that the Minister refers to. I thought I would just give you a perspective of where we are on tax revenues. When the team of Treasury, Reserve Bank and SARS puts together the budget estimate, they make certain assumptions. And when those assumptions don't bear out, you have a different outcome. So what were some of the key assumptions? One key assumption was that the wage bill would grow at about 8.4% year on year. And what we see in reality is the wage bill for the fiscal year has only grown by 5.4%. And if your wage bill doesn't grow, your taxes on individuals don't grow, and which accounts for the under-recovery of personal taxes. We made an assumption that fuel levy would grow. Fuel levy can only grow if three things happen: if you increase the rate, if you increase the volume, and if you increase the price. The minister fixed the price to alleviate some stress in the economy. Volumes, good news and bad news, actually went down by about 11% of consumption. The good news is that Eskom is producing more reliably. A lot of replacement rooftop, a lot of people switch from diesel and petrol to rooftop solar to supplement energy. So consumption is down about 1.3 million litres. The price is largely the same and the rate is the same, so hence the huge reduction in fuel levies. And the third big shift in the assumption was we penciled in at the time of the budget that trade imports would increase at 1.9%, and actually year to date it has declined by 3.7%, so more than 5 percentage point swing, and therefore we see a significant reduction in import VAT, as well as a significant reduction in customs duties. Those are some of the three big reasons why the revenue is down. What are some of the flip sides of that on the revenue? We didn't see the gross fixed capital formation as much as we also thought at the time of the budget. It's down by also about 5 percentage points. But what we are surprisingly seeing, and so large businesses are not reporting better provisional taxes than what we had envisaged. They are remaining true to what we thought. The mining sector struggling, financial sector slightly up. But what is a surprise upward trend, and I think the electricity security has something to do with it, is a more positive mood in corporate income taxes in the medium and smaller businesses. Although we have some compliance challenges there, provisional taxes were up in that sector, and that added about 8.8 billion. And then, of course, the second half of the year, the teams projected in some contribution from the two-pot retirement system. What I can share with you is, as of this morning, we have just crossed the 1.7 million applicants, just a few bob short of 30 billion that will be withdrawn by South Africans. That should be good because it will bring some effervescence in the economy, provided spend the money wisely and pay their VAT on the money they spend. And then, of course, that will also mean we are now approaching about 7.5 billion of taxes that we will collect from the reduction of tax on the amounts withdrawn. And as the Minister said, Minister, the amount of debt we should be getting is now standing at about 750 million rand, that 750 billion rand that we will be getting from that. Sorry, 750 million rand that we will get from that. So what the Minister and the Treasury team penciled in yesterday means that what we will replace by a little bit better performing domestic VAT, provisional tax for medium and small companies, and the contribution from the two-pot system will not be enough to replace the losses in individual taxes, in trade taxes, and in fuel levy. So that gives you a little bit of a reason why the revenue is what it is. What we are also finding is that we've actually resolved more of our cases to collect outstanding debt. Last year, you will recall, for the entire year, we resolved about 2.1 million cases of outstanding debt. This year, for the first 6 months, we've actually already resolved 1.7 million cases of outstanding debt. The difference is that we have found a threefold increase in taxpayers who are not disputing their debt, but are simply saying to us, we can't pay you, and we found a threefold increase in requests for repayment arrangements, debt deferments, which the law allows us to do, as well as suspension of debt has gone up also 2.5 times. Interestingly, many taxpayers will apply for a suspension of debt, and you do that when you enter into dispute, and some taxpayers do that just as a delaying tactic, not necessarily because they dispute the outcome, they just buy themselves more time. And what that also reflects is the hardship that many South Africans are facing. So we find the debt book growing, not necessarily because people dispute their debt, but because they just don't have the ability to pay. Interesting data points for some of the nerds in the room.
The 5 million taxpayers that we have already paid over 30 billion of refunds to, we were able to do that by using third-party data and artificial intelligence. So again, the narrative is not that we use data and AI to catch the crooks. We actually use it more to service taxpayers. So you would not be able to issue 5 million assessments if you did not have data and AI. Of the 5 million that we issued, we had a 98% acceptance rate. 2% decided to edit their return. Of the 2% who edited their return, half of them had no change outcome. So actually 99% of people. The 1% that adjusted their returns was clearly because we don't have third-party data. So we don't have third-party data on rooftop solars. We don't have third-party data on out-of-pocket medical expenses, and we don't have third-party data on travel logs by individuals. So that 1%, as the system permits, could adjust their declaration. And they, plus about another 800,000 of other taxpayers who are not in that category, submitted their returns, and they would have received their assessment in under 5 seconds. And if they were not selected for any verification, they would have received their refunds in under 72 hours. So that's world class. It's impressive by any standard that we are able to do that.
We also completed 115 lifestyle audits focusing on luxury vehicles. That contributed R1 billion to the fiscus. And 45 cases that were flagged by the FIC through reportable arrangements contributed about another 1.4 billion rand. And so this is the work we do to try and close the gap between what the economy produces and ultimately what we give to the minister and to Duncan to dish out, hopefully to dish out more to investment and less to consumption over time so that our economy can grow. Just to end on, Minister, you know, debt management isn't only a problem for government. I'll just share, a company that both Isaah and myself worked for when I joined. We used to make. No, you don't. We used to make R1 billion profit a year, and we used the R1 billion just to service the debt, not to pay off the debt, just to service the debt. So we had no money to invest for 5 years until we listed the company. We had no money to invest. So government has the same problem. In private sector, they just call it private equity. And in government, you have the same problem. So just to make you feel a little bit better about struggling with paying debt. Thank you.
There's only one company which you and Isaah share.
DG, sir, I know you got to go. And you're probably late for your 9 o'clock. Thank you, sir. Okay. Any burning question for the DG? from anyone in the room? There's a lady over there who has a burning question for you, sir. Just so you leave us with more than just a goodbye. Is there a mic that, okay. So we're gonna do some walking this morning, it's fine. I didn't go to the gym, so this is good. I'm getting my steps. Wonderful, thank you so much.
Hi, Kim Silverman from Matrix. Hi, Duncan, how are you? You spoke about, well, firstly, thank you for a very solid budget. We really appreciate what you do. I wanted to ask a bit about the growth and employment that the minister referred to, because I think that is the critical issue. And this might seem like a micro issue, but I think part of what what can drive growth is small business. So I think that's where the employment comes from. And small business is suffering, I think, maybe more than we can quantify by the overbilling problems. I think that's really difficult to budget for them, and also it affects their ability to survive, especially when I think tax collection is getting so much better. Is there anything that National Treasury can do about the issues facing small businesses in municipalities where this is, an endemic problem?
Thank you, Kim. Morning, everyone. I'll answer that in two ways. I think the one is there's quite a lot of sort of National Treasury technical detail that I could go into around how we are internally within the Treasury, and it is covered in the MTBPS, changing the way in which we are supporting municipalities. So there's multiple different programs within the National Treasury. There's a Municipal Revenue Improvement Program, there's a Municipal Financial Management Enhancement Program, and so on and so forth. And what these programs do is that they deploy experts into municipalities and help municipalities with some of their basic functions, including those that are struggling with things like billing problems and revenue management and so on. One of the changes that the minister announced in the MTBPS this year was that we are bringing those programs together into a single municipal support function. So whether it's revenue management, whether it's financial management, and whether it's the other support services that we offer, we're bringing that into a single program so that we can better
little bit on hold as far as investment is concerned, and that limits global environment. Now, in that environment, how do you balance the need to continue to protect social spending, at the same time investing in critical infrastructure? It's a difficult job. Fortunately, we don't have that job. It's the job that National Treasury has to do. So we just have to say they have presented a balanced budget in the midst of difficult challenges. At least there is a focus on growth, which is ultimately what is going to provide sustainability in our fiscals.
Okay. Carmen, Isaah, in his opening presentation, spoke about two ways to look at this budget. You can look at it from an investor perspective, or you can look at it from a social perspective. With your investor hat on right now, what was your perspective? I mean, it has been notable, some of your colleagues in the industry spoke about the fact that the rand weakened as the minister was talking. Of course, we do know that the rand has been moved by various factors right now, particularly in the lead up to the 5th of November, next week, Tuesday. But your initial take to the budget as an investor?
Yeah, so I think it's crucial to know what hat you're wearing. So I think as an investor, I would say very pragmatic. We're still moving in the right direction. So things are going to be incremental, right? It's very difficult to turn a ship around, and I think we have done that. So I think that was very positive. So yes, broadly balanced. I don't think anyone could be really upset with the budget. Obviously, it's very difficult to keep everyone happy. So that is quite crucial. And I think the reform...
Sorry, can we not hear her?
Can we not hear me?
Okay, so it's a pragmatic budget.
Yes, very much reform focused. And I think where you did pick up on some disappointment, I think it would say more about your expectations than about the budget. So I think some investors may have had unrealistic expectations about the budget, talking about a new inflation target and actually having a box on the fiscal rule. These are things that are going to take a very long time and require significant political buy-in. So I think, so the rand is actually back where it was before the budget, and bond yields sold off by a full 10 basis points. So, there weren't any surprises, and I think a boring budget is a good budget.
Okay. Boring is good. Commissioner, sir, notwithstanding the decline to revenue collection forecast that was announced, how much tax is in the economy so that could get the enhancing efficiencies in the system that is much needed?
Our compliance levels...
Can we hear the Commissioner?
Can you hear? We know that our compliance levels are at the mid-60s, so it's about 65, which tells you that we have, the flip side, 35% of non-compliant. That's derived from what we know, right? In other words, what we have on our register, 65% of them, or either what we know on our register or know who ought to be registered, about 65% of them are compliant. So we know that there is revenue from the known universe that we are not collecting. We have a growing debt book, which is also revenue that belongs to the fiscus that's not collected. And we have about 54 million outstanding returns, and we attach a value to an outstanding return. Generally, people don't file because there's money. If they thought they had a refund due, they would file. So we know that there's easily over 300 billion in the economy of the known universe. Then through various studies, the Davis Tax Commission, our own modeling, come up adjusted for current values, also over 300 billion from the tax gap. And so we do know, and we have this discussion with the Minister, that there's a huge tax gap that represents opportunity landscape for SARS that would improve. And now you can't just go out and enforce, because that's transactional and people will game the system. So it is about strengthening the entire system. And by the system, I don't just mean SARS, I mean society. The contract between society and the state is important to improve the culture of compliance. We've seen a significant increase in 2019. Trust in the system in SARS was 48%. Earlier this year, that trust had gone up to 75%. That's very positive. Attitude towards compliance, as measured through an independent survey, went up from 66% to 77.5%. So that's positive. But we still have a lot to do to improve the social cohesion, the social contract between government and the state, which will then reflect. The big concern, by the way, that I have, shared by my colleagues, my peers in the FTA, is the two biggest concerns from a core business perspective is growing debt. Around the world, tax administrations are struggling to recover debt, and a proliferation of tax and financial crime, which invariably is cross-border. So it's more than just a single administration, generally syndicated crime, multi-jurisdictional, and we struggle with that. And so those are the challenges that we all face.
Okay.
So we know that there's opportunity, which will require a continued investment in society as well as in the administration.
Okay. Isaah, Carmen mentioned the expectations around inflation targeting, and it was mentioned in the budget as well to the degree, or to what degree monetary policy could potentially be reworked to show up for the economy in a different kind of manner. And I'd just like your view. I mean, I do know that there has been talks about potentially dropping the target band for monetary policy and just focusing on a fixed target. What were your expectations regarding that, and perhaps what are your inputs on what that should be to be growth enhancing?
We speak with a lot of investors, local and offshore. There was an expectation by some for the inflation target, at least something to be said about the inflation target. But that expectation was not for the MTBPS. At the earliest, expectations were for the February budget next year. So it's a missing piece that the National Treasury eventually would have to make a pronouncement on. So I think we can ask them, they are here, in terms of their thinking and whether they can make a commitment on it. We can reserve that question for them. Just to follow on Carmen's point, some of the things that were not in the budget. Fiscal anchor, it wasn't. But there's an implicit commitment, you could actually say an explicit commitment to a primary surplus for the next decade, which to my mind would be a fiscal anchor. So yes, you haven't, Treasury hasn't put together in terms of an explicit target, whether it's debt to GDP ratio or a fiscal deficit target, but ultimately whatever the intermediate variable they use, it has to achieve a primary surplus. So they have announced a fiscal anchor. It's just not legislated, which is the missing piece. They say they're still working through the legislative process. It requires some political buy-in. So hopefully in February we will get something. That is one of the expectations for many investors, to say there is a need for a fiscal anchor. It has to be legislated. If it's not legislated, it's just a suggestion or a guidance. It's not binding, which is what we have seen with the expenditure ceiling.
Okay. Can I come back to you and just ask you on the commitment of achieving a primary surplus for the next decade? A lot of questions around whether that commitment is a realistic and achievable one. In your view, Isaah, what say you?
It's a difficult one. It's the first time that we achieve a primary surplus in 15 years. So to say we are going to achieve it consecutively for the next 10 years, it's a difficult sell. There has to be enough evidence that says we have changed in terms of the way that we conduct our fiscal management that can guarantee that primary surplus. So until we can demonstrate, it's difficult to actually believe it's achievable on the basis of the history that we have seen for the past 15 years.
Okay.
So maybe the Treasury, colleagues can give us some pointers to say where should we look for us to say we can believe this 10-year primary surplus consecutively. What should we look for?
Okay. So 2 questions there for the Treasury, and I do see the Deputy Finance Minister jotting them down, so we look hopefully forward to hearing what his response is. Carmen, perhaps to you to build on that, and also just to give us your view on the credit standing of the budget. A number of your colleagues have been talking about what the credit rating implications potentially could be of what the midterm budget was, or what the midterm budget presented yesterday. Your take on what you are expecting from the ratings agencies.
Yes, so in terms of the credit rating agencies, there are roughly 4 things I think that are crucial. So if you build a credit rating model, the one is actually GDP per capita, so that's where the reform comes in, so I think that's a tick. The other one is the rate of change in the debt ratio. So there also there's substantial improvement, particularly if we are able to stabilize debt over the next 5 years. Then there's revenue, interest payments to revenue. That is also expected to stabilize. And the other one that's quite a key determinant is perceptions of corruptions. Now, perversely, we've actually weakened slightly on those metrics, but I think it's because over the last 5 years, we've actually aired our dirty laundry. So, so it's not a tick at the moment, but I think it will improve. I think it's a tall order to expect credit rating upgrades just yet. I think delivery is key, so following through. So just to sort of add on what Isaah said around the commitment, a concern is that our, call it political cycle, does bring into question whether the commitment will be sustained. I think that's something that may also feature in terms of a time stamp on the GNU, specifically the ANC election.
What do you mean by political cycle? I think the finance minister said that the GNU was here for 5 years.
Yes, well, it could be, assuming the correct faction wins in 2027. What I mean by the political cycle is we've got national government elections, and then 2 years later, local government elections. The year after that, ANC elections, and then 2 years after that, national government elections. So there's always a political pressure point, whether it's national and provincial, or then local government, or then ANC. So that's what I mean by a tricky political cycle. The other thing just around inflation targeting, and I know it's not something a bond investor should be saying, is just to say, it's not obvious that that should be the priority. Than trying to get to 3% over a very short period of time. And part of that would be around, dealing with administered prices, and maybe actually just every little bit helps in terms of rate cuts to get growth going. So I know it's not what a bond investor should be saying, but I think also to add, the risk premium in our local market is not an inflation risk premium, right? It's a fiscal risk premium, and we're trying to deal with that.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe I can add on the rating, potential rating responses. Before COVID, you would have expected a potential downgrade by another notch. Post-COVID, we see growth picks up. There are a lot of reforms that are done, a rebuilding of institutions, and that institutional pillar have improved. So in addition to Carmen's points, as far as growth and other fiscal matrices, they're relatively okay. And then we see an improvement in the institutional pillar, which means it's a sensible view to no longer expect a credit rating downgrade going forward, which is what we have done. We're no longer expecting a credit rating downgrade because the institutional pillar has improved, while all the other macro variables have stabilized.
Okay. And upgrades?
Sorry?
Upgrades?
Too soon. We require growth for upgrades, and Treasury's forecasts are quite conservative, less than 2% over the medium term. You'd even venture to say the growth forecasts are not bold enough in the sense that, yes, we're saying we're doing all the economic reforms, but there is a recognition that those economic reforms are not big enough to push us to a 2.5 to 3% economic growth. So one other question that we could pose would be, what are the things that we need to do so that we can start talking about a 3% economic growth in our forecasts that are not yet reflected? Because you don't see any other forecaster having faster economic growth in their projections, despite the economic reforms that we're doing. Are we saying they're not enough?
Okay. Who do we pose that question to?
The treasurer that is doing the Operation Vulindlela.
Okay. Commissioner, you're also free to add your thoughts in terms of what else do we need to do to get to that 3%. But I want to circle back to the matter of compliance and the greater tax compliance that you're trying to drive, so amongst that 35% or so that are not. Those that are, and even perhaps those that are not right now, what do you say to really bolster the level of compliance from South Africans who are saying that they are paying for services in this economy, the likes of water and electricity and the like, that a solid and capable state should actually be providing. But nonetheless, they are paying for them, but they are not seeing service delivery show up to the kind of or in the kind of way that their hard-earned rands are going towards addressing this. Your thoughts then, sir?
Look, I mean, I have a very, very steadfast view that even those in society, and I often hear, people talk about a tax revolt or withholding our taxes. And whenever I hear that, the face behind that is a privileged face. It's someone who has employment, someone who has the means, someone who has financial security, or at least largely so. We have to accept that we live in a significantly unequal society. Despite everything over the last 30 years, we have not substantively delivered on the promise of our Constitution. The stubborn trilogy of unemployment, poverty, and inequality has remained. And so wealthy people can insure themselves against pandemics. They can insure themselves against natural disasters. They can buy supplementary medical, supplementary education, and other needs that government does not provide at the same level that they expect it. Poor people can't. And so poor people, and in South Africa, that is a significant proportion of our population, our brothers and sisters, they need government. And so if you think you're withholding your taxes because you want to hurt government, you're actually hurting the poor people. You're hurting the very people who have nowhere else to go. So I am a strong advocate for tax morality, for living up to the spirit of the law, and to accept that those of us who have privilege have an obligation to share what we have with those who don't. And so,
isn't that a bit unfair?
What is unfair about it?
So here's the thing.
Life is not fair, right? We have all had unequal access to education. Some of us grew up in townships with education levels that weren't adequate. So life is not fair. It never is. But I think as a society, we have to build a greater sense of solidarity, a greater sense of social cohesion, because we often have a short-term view that seeks to protect our narrow interest, rather than taking a broader view and say if we want all of us to be better, then we have to share what we have. And I know it sounds almost spiritual or evangelical, but it's the truth, right? If we don't begin to take care of each other, then we will have to build higher walls, more gated communities, more private security. Whereas if we share what we have, and taxation is a blunt way of sharing, but it's the only way that we have at the moment.
Sure.
And we have to, as South Africans, those of us who are privileged, to commit to paying our share of taxes and then hold government accountable. If they don't behave or don't perform as the voters have done now, the voters have spoken. The voters said to the ruling party, we don't want to give you an outright majority. It said to the other parties, we don't think you're ready to have it yet. And so for me, our democracy has worked. It has brought about a different relationship between political forces. The government of national unity is an opportunity for us. It's not the golden bullet or silver bullet, but it's a wonderful opportunity for us to reconfigure, reconceptualize what's possible in our democracy. And I think it's up to all of us to make it work.
Okay. Okay. I know you answered me there in terms of, in as much as we should be committed as citizens who perhaps have a better leg in life, it is also the commitment or the responsibility of government to make sure that they deliver on the services that individuals who may be more privileged have, because I mean they're also in this economy, so, and it has been tough for them as well. I get to speak to them on a daily basis as well, and perhaps less so, but still tough. Maybe at this point we should, Deputy Minister, if you are comfortable, invite you just to respond to some of the questions that have come up so far. I know you have been taking your notes, but if you need a summary, just number one, the commitments on inflation targeting and whether this is likely to show up in the February 2025 budget, only because we want to hear your voice, so we haven't heard from you. Number two, also the how realistic a primary surplus is in the next 10 years. And the question around bolder targets. And in terms of 3%, what else can be done to get us there?
Fifi, I came here to support the minister. You put him on the spot. So I was saying to the minister, Minister, you've got to answer these questions because I take the line from you. But let me answer just one on the primary budget surplus, which is expenditure being lower than the revenue. And that's going to be a function of A, economic growth, which will give us more revenue so that we don't run any budget deficit. And I think the structural reforms that we've been undertaking since the last administration, the sixth administration to be precise, have set very good conditions to get our economy growing, because as the minister said, we've been focusing on the supply side constraints, the bottleneck, the supply of energy, electricity, telecommunications. And for us, we want to deepen the reforms that we've undertaken in the first phase, in the energy space, freight logistics, and I can go on and on insofar as the things that we're seeking to do. But the second phase of the reforms have to focus on the functionality of the municipalities, local government, as well as the issues around the spatial inequality and so on and so on. So if that gives us growth, as we all know, tax revenue has to come out of that economic growth. And the position that we've taken is that we're not interested in increasing tax rates because there's a limit to that. As we know, the Lafayette curve says that you can increase your tax rates and increase revenue, but there's a tipping point where it becomes economically irrational for economic agents to get involved in economic activities, and that undermines your growth. So our policy position insofar as the tax is concerned has been to grow the economy, broadening the base and all that. So we're not seeking to deal with the budget surplus, the primary budget surplus through increasing taxes and all that. That's not what we seek to do, at least as long as the minister and the good faction taking over in 2027. That's not the and of course we've also said it's important for us to embark on fiscal consolidation, but do it in such a manner that you don't undermine the growth enhancing investment, infrastructure, as the minister was articulating yesterday. And we are also looking at the social wage in its totality, on how you make it more targeted and more integrated. So this work that we're doing in that regard. So the direction is towards making sure that we put our debt at sustainable level, because if your debt is too high, it does not only crowd out expenditure and crowd out private sector investment, but it also affects your ability to attract investment on your exchange.
On that note.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, just no, it's fine.
Sorry,
just fine. On that note, on attracting investment, you're fresh from New York, where the SA Investor Tomorrow conference, I believe, was taking place. It's been taking place for the past 11 years, and SA Inc. goes out and pitches its best investment case for attracting investments in the economy. What are foreign investors saying right now about the positive momentum that's underpinning the economy? Are they keen to come back more?
They are keen. The sentiment is very positive, both in London, New York. And I think one of the things that we've been saying is that in focusing on debt, we understand that any investor who comes to South Africa on our stock exchange, they will come in and say, we expect the following return. And one of the things they look at, it's your yield. Because they will need anything above the yield on the equities. And if your yield is too high, they're going to demand higher return in investing in the stock exchange. And therefore, getting our debt to the sustainable level to reduce the sovereign risk premium, it's what they are looking at, it's what they are interested in.
Okay.
So it is in the interest of economic growth that we look at our debt levels, and as the minister said, the debt is not the problem in itself, it's a question of whether the economy can sustain, can service that debt. So I think the sentiment is very positive.
Okay.
And the animal spirits, to use Keynes' as formulation, are very positive and high. But the question is, how do we maintain this positive sentiment towards South Africa? And the focus on growth, structural reforms, infrastructure, is what is critical for us.
Okay. Just given the fact that the mic is on the floor right now, any other questions?
The Minister would like to just add something.
Oh, this Minister of mine.
There are still outstanding issues.
Are you going to, okay, on the inflation target commitment, February 2025.
Fiscal rules, all of those issues. And just on the fiscal angle, let me just make the point that, as Isaah knows, economists make a lot of assertions built on certain assumptions, and they then build an escape clause. That escape clause is for as long as things remain the same. In other words, for as long as with the right faction, you don't have any other challenges. those assumptions are built in the equation. But let me start with the two things which are two sides of the same coin. The inflation targeting and fiscal rules on the other hand. I don't want to mislead you and say there will be an announcement in February. I'll be misleading you and this audience. Because let's be practical, we've got a macro standing committee between ourselves and the SAR. And that macro standing committee is dealing with these issues. It deals, I mean, one of the issues we've not crossed for me to be happy. This exercise is not going to be painless. If we're going to go that route, and what pain are we going to enjoy, and how are we going to cushion that pain? The macro standing committee has got to answer that question. I don't think they would have answered that question by February, 19th of February. There will be pain in getting that route, and what is the nature of that pain? How are we going to cushion the impact of that pain? I don't have the answer to that question, so I can't put my neck on the block in February on that issue without those answers. The other side of the coin is the fiscal rules. The other side of the coin in fiscal rules, one of the issues you must remember is that John George put what was called fiscal responsibility bill, which in one way or the other was part of fiscal. It failed in Parliament. All right? It failed in Parliament. My own basic reading of fiscal rules, and by the way, I've decided to study them more. One of my things is to study fiscal rules. It's two things. There's a lot of, about 100 studies which have been done on fiscal rules. All of them are focusing on the economic impact. The economic impact is perfect of fiscal rules. What they have, the studies that have not been done is impact on inequality, and also the possibility of a political support. None of them would go on without a political support. As things stand in the South African system, there's no political support for it. You can just, it's quite nice for a bureaucrat to write a document and talk about fiscal rules, but you're not going to get through in Parliament. So why waste your time? So I'm being honest to the audience that it's quite very nice to talk about these things, but in the real world, it doesn't work that way.
Okay. Is that okay? The fact that it doesn't work that way?
Well, no announcement on inflation target, so that's certainty is good to know, is always good. Also, no fiscal rule, at least not yet.
But we do have a fiscal anchor. Yes.
Yes, I think the question of the fiscal anchor has always been, it can be shifted because it's not legislated, which is something that we have seen with the expenditure ceiling. Time and again, it has been pierced through. So what really characterizes it as an anchor if it can be changed?
Even fiscal rules will build exit clauses. So there will always be nothing certain.
Yeah, not true.
The only certainty is uncertainty, in essence. Any other questions? I mean, I imagine that many of you didn't wake up so early in the morning, as we learned that Cape Townians don't do the early thing. I disagree. But do feel free just to chip in should you have any. But Carmen, go ahead.
So I have a question, I don't know, just with regard to this, obviously it's a very reform and infrastructure-focused MTBPS. Is then how will you ensure that the infrastructure side is clearly carved out or delineated from the rest? So interestingly, to talk about fiscal rules, for much of the 1900s, which I know sounds very long ago, the SA government or finance minister in some form ran a sort of a dual budget framework where they had the current budget and the CapEx budget, and they were delineated. And I know we do publish the table separately, but current expenditure was funded out of revenue and CapEx was funded out of borrowing, which makes complete sense. So would we ever get back to that? So in other words, where you don't, you're not borrowing 10, 20 years in terms of loans you take on to effectively pay salaries every month. And the other sort of just comment more than a question, just on the Commissioner's comment about the social stability that taxes actually buy. It's about incentives, right? So as a taxpayer, you have to understand that your incentive for paying tax is you buy the social stability. And maybe that's also important in terms of the infrastructure rollout is often government comes out with the stick first, right, instead of the carrot. And again, I'm a parent of 3, so positive parenting is maybe we should think about putting the carrot out first, and if that doesn't work, then you bring out the stick.
A carrot, what would that
in terms of incentives, right? So a good example now where a stick was needed was with the IPPs, where they had bid at very low levels, and then the projects don't become viable, and now they pay fines, correctly so. So if you're going to try and undercut competition to get the deal, but you actually know it's not going to be viable, then you should be paying a fine. And sort of also incentivize, if you're ready first to tie into the grid, then you should be able to leapfrog. So that's what I mean by carrots and sticks. Trying to think of other examples would be, okay, SARS, making it very easy to do your tax return, then you're going to do it. So that's one example of putting the carrot out there. Make it easy. Have a call center, ideally on a Saturday as well. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But I mean, those things help.
Would you like to respond, Commissioner?
Well, I think it's central to how we administer. That's why I said the narrative that we're using AI to catch people is wrong. We're using AI to serve taxpayers better. We forget so easily that before we started our transformation journey, when everything was physical, it would have taken us on average 6 months for you to receive your assessment outcome. Today, that takes under 5 seconds. And that's only for the 40 or the 37% this year who had to file. 63% of them didn't have to file at all. That's what we're using. That's a carrot. It's a huge carrot. When we started the transformation, we realized that people who submit early, they have the expectation of a refund. Well, before digitalization, it would have taken you on average 50 days for you to receive a refund if you were not chosen for an audit. Today, 7 out of 10 people would have received their refund in under 72 hours. Those are huge shifts, big carrots, which is why in payroll administered taxes, our compliance is above 75%. The problem we have with these provisional taxpayers, wealthy people who can still arrange and organize their affairs to try and mask their true income. But for ordinary taxpayers, we really want once a year for you to receive a thank you note from us. We don't want you to visit us. We don't want you to call us, because no one wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to go to SARS, right? Or I wonder if they lost my phone number. We really want tax just to happen, and that's a huge carrot. And I think we are substantially along the way. For ordinary taxpayers, the next big investment will be for more complex taxpayers, and that's the next 5 to 10 years of our modernization.
Okay. Perhaps, would you want to? Okay.
On
the carrots.
Carrots, more carrots.
No,
But,
no, I think, and maybe we should take you on your own on what kind of carrots incentive. We would like to offer incentives if we're possible. But your broader question was, what is, in terms of the structure of the budget process, how are we going to fund this infrastructure? I think we're closer to what you call a dual process. If you read the speech and the budget document, it says we will fund the infrastructure and borrow separately for the infrastructure. In other words, that talks to your dual process.
Okay. Carmen, I think you might have just scored yourself a consulting job there. Charge adequately. She might have scored herself a consultancy job with you on pay tax charge.
Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank.
I was saying to,
Sure, sir.
I was saying to the minister, can you hear me? Yes, whispering to him that insofar as creating incentive for the private sector to invest in the infrastructure, he should talk about the credit guarantee scheme, because that's a structure to de-risk infrastructure investment by the private sector by way of saying, okay, go and invest in this transmission. In an unlikely event, you're going to have liquidity challenges or termination challenges. This credit guarantee scheme guarantees that your returns will be realized. It's no longer the guarantee measure in which we took the contingent liability into the sovereign, like we did with the IPPs and so on and so. We're simply saying that scheme will be funded by the private sector, and of course, as a state, to show our skin in the game, will contribute some amount towards that. So that's one way of incentivizing the private sector to invest in that. The same thing, if it's successful, our intention is to take it to infrastructure for rail, water, and so on and so on. And there are incentive schemes that we're also creating for the trade, the metro trading services, the municipalities, and the speech goes at length, and the book itself around what kind of incentives we're creating to get the private sector to invest in infrastructure.
Okay. So colleagues, we have got around 10 minutes left for the session, and just one last invitation to, okay, there's a hand there, to express any questions or comments that you might have. Yes, sir.
Testing. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. And Minister, thank you very much for the speech. I really agree South Africa has a growth problem. And my question is pertaining to the infrastructure, specifically digital infrastructure, both for you, Minister, and the Commissioner. One, what is being done from a digital infrastructure perspective? What is the plan to digitize, all the government institutions? And two, the Intellectual Property Commissioner, regarding the AI platforms, how does the young people of South Africa get involved in developing that IP? Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. By those shades, I can see that you are an individual of the future. Thank you so much.
Can we just have your name and tax number, please? So, I think just in terms of the digital platform, there's a commitment, and the presidency has now formed a working group to look at the digital transformation for the whole of government, because that's part of the problem. You can't digitalize one portion of the state. You have to. There's a number of interesting developments. The first is that the South African Reserve Bank and SARS have embarked on a instant payment platform. The bankers are not going to like this, because they make a lot of money out of the current national payment system that promises real-time gross settlement, but actually doesn't provide real-time gross settlement. And so the instant payment platform will, following the Brazil model, significantly improve financial inclusion, because other than the current payment system by the banks, it's only for licensed banks, whereas the instant payment system will also bring on the fintechs. And a lot of the next generation and also the lower income groups, for them it's far better to use just the fintech. So it'll crowd on the fintechs, and it'll also, the Brazil experience is that it's taken their financial inclusion to about 93, 94%, and it has taken out cash from about 77% to 44% in their system. And we need to take cash out of our system because cash is inefficient, it's expensive, it's high risk, but also it is a breeding ground for corruption and for that. So that's, we've embarked on a project with the Reserve Bank to do that. In line with that, working with the Reserve Bank and Home Affairs, if I get the money from my boss here, to work towards a unique digital identity. At the moment, the absence of a digital identity means that in South Africa, I have an ID number, I have a tax number, I have a number with SIPC, I have, if I'm a NED, I also have a VAT number. If I go to Godongwana, they'll give me a patient number. So I appear in the system in many different identities, which allows for arbitrage. So I can be employed and get a social grant because the system doesn't pick me up. I can be a member of Discovery and get medicine cheap from Godongwana. So a digital identity is very important, and we are working now. In discussion with the Home Affairs colleagues, we said, if we can provide you with a tax assessment, which is far more complex than a visa, in under 5 seconds, why can't we issue a visa in under 5 seconds? The fact is the technology is there. And so they are working with us to develop a proof of concept for instant visa. But more of that has to happen across the whole of government. And that's the commitment by government. And again, it's the difference between formulating an intent and a policy and execution execution is hard and requires resources.
Okay, okay. Commissioner, please, sir, don't ask people their tax numbers. They're not going to ask questions. It's making my job
that
very
was a
difficult.
joke. I already have his tax number.
Minister or Deputy Minister, just maybe a follow-up on the gentleman's question around digital infrastructure and perhaps maybe more details on the rollout there.
Yeah, two points there. One is, okay, the Operation Vulindlela Phase 2 will be focusing on that. On the how you digitize the government services. Because the best way of providing services is also through digitization. So there will be work, a lot of work that we'll be doing in that regard. On the digital infrastructure, broadly to connect communities, SMMEs, and so on, you've got the company called the Broadband Infrastructure Company. It's a government-owned entity, but like many SOEs, its balance sheet is constrained, and through Operation Vulindlela, we're thinking about, okay, how do you bring incentives for the private sector to participate in helping us with the infrastructure, fiber, and so on and so on. So I think at the right time, we will announce the details on what type of incentives that we need to put in place to get fiber to poor communities, to get our communities connected in that regard. I mean, one way through which we're thinking about this is maybe put a fund to incentivize internet companies and say, if you're connecting poor communities, you should be given some money to subsidize connectivity for the poor. So that's one broad idea that we're thinking about within Operation Vulindlela. So, but the orientation is how do you incentivize the private sector to get into this kind of infrastructure. And I'm sure at the right time, we'll announce the details when we're ready insofar as this digital infrastructure is concerned.
Okay, okay.
There's
I'm
an
not seeing
interesting,
any other hands.
You know,
Okay.
when the Deputy Minister spoke now, there's an interesting, and you raised the issue of incentive. By the way, I believe the best incentive is a proper business case. But there was an interesting, when I was a young power station manager and Eskom needed to electrify, many countries have reached high levels of electrification but low levels of consumption because poor people couldn't afford it. And so what Eskom did in the late 90s, early 2000s was, because you needed at least a 50 units per month consumption to make the investment worthwhile. So Eskom actually gave kettles and single plate burners and basic irons to people in the townships when they electrified, and so consumption went up. It's a simple way of incentivizing. So similarly, what we need to do, besides educating people to use digital infrastructure, is, I mean, mobile companies do that. They give you the phone because they know the real money is in the data that you buy.
Sure.
So I think we must be creative in how we, because ultimately it's not just about the hard infrastructure, it's about building a digital culture.
Sure. There's a lot that can be said. I mean, we've got around 7 minutes and a lot that perhaps hasn't been said. I mean, we didn't discuss FATF to great detail. An interesting comment coming from the Banking Association of South Africa, noting the progress that has been made that the minister didn't announce regarding FATF, but just also highlighting maybe some gray areas with regards to greater enforcements and perhaps maybe, jail time needed for perpetrators of money laundering and illicit financial flows. You have a question on there, okay.
I have a question just with regard to, again, how we think about, we obviously have to adhere to, the anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. So that's not the question. The question is more the unintended consequences of adhering to this type of international legislation. I mean, there was an article in the Business Day, I think on Monday, which cited that, FICA requirements make it difficult to increase financial inclusion. So it's not obvious that with the fintechs that changes because you'd still be required to have an address. And then around the question of SMMEs is, the cost of compliance with a lot of regulation, does make it difficult. I mean, I was at an IFA conference, and if you're a one-man shop, just the amount of compliance you as a single person have to ensure you comply with, the number of things, it's increased significantly. And FATF, the grey listing, has contributed to it. So, I mean, so how do we strike that balance around not becoming a gangster state? And we risk, if you read about the construction mafias and the water mafias, we risk so very much a dual economy, one that follows all the global rules and another one that's sort of underground, is balancing that to get the inequality down by actually lifting poor people up and not making rich people poorer, if that makes sense. To both the Finance Minister, Deputy Minister, as well as the Commissioner.
Sure.
Do you want me to? Yeah. I think, first of all, I want to just debunk the issue about you need an address. In the old days, you needed to be home to get a phone call. Now you can get a phone call anywhere because of mobility. Similarly, we think that the digital identity is what anchors you, not a physical address, because you can have multiple addresses, you can still arbitrage the system. So I think for us a huge issue to address is digital identity rather than a physical address. Obviously, we would love to see, I mean, this year to date, we have resolved 27 complex syndicated cases already and added 7 billion of additional revenue to the fiscus. A lot of that we then rely on the Hawks and the NPA to bring those cases to trial. And while the minister, both ministers are here, one of the things that I think we let ourselves down with is this thing called an APP and how we incentivize KPIs for departments. Let me give you a very practical example. If the NPA is incentivized for the number of successful cases they prosecute, there's a perverse incentive for them to take simpler cases and not complex cases. right? Because for them to, we say we have a 95% success rate for cases we hand over to the NPA. But a significant portion of those cases are outstanding return cases, not complex crime cases. So we need to look at how we incentivize performance. Often the departments act as narrow silos rather than having an overarching performance indicator that enjoins us to the same higher goal rather than our narrow goals.
Okay.
So that's part of the ways of how we have to recalibrate the performance of the government to achieve a higher level of prosecution, in addition to building the capacity that's required.
Okay, so it does sound like you have got
Just
potential
one point.
solutions there for the challenge. Yes, sir.
We must accept that the question asked by Carmen is complex.
Okay.
Because I was saying here, structural reforms is about making sure that we do business, we make your business simply making business. But at the same time, global rules require us to make it not simple. So I think that's the point you are making, because those global rules, you have got to be thicker, you have got to get, even estate agents now, they are not used to it. The lawyers are angry with it because they themselves have got to be thicker. So we're making running business complex. But on the other side, structural reforms is to make sure that running business must be simple.
Sure.
It's not an easy thing, but I accept what the Commissioner is saying, but there's an added dimension which this thing, what he's talking about, it adds complexity to the system.
Okay. So thanks so much for that intervention. And as I said, we're wrapping up and perhaps giving you, Isaah, the final word. A lot has been said, a lot also has not been said. I mean, the Deputy Minister did touch on SOEs. Eskom has been mentioned quite a few times. The mining industry's response has actually been, while the infrastructure plans and what this could potentially mean for logistics are quite welcomed, while the fact that there were no bailouts this time around for the likes of Transnet is positive, but there is a concern as to whether Transnet needs a little bit more help in its recovery plan. I mean, that's something that is out there. But Isaah, as you wrap this thing up for us, I also want you to talk about the tailwind that could potentially come for South Africa as hosts of the G20, with the major economies set to descend on this country, and how we can best position ourselves in that opportunity to perhaps help achieve the 3% growth target that some envision.
Look, I think the tailwinds are global factors as it stands. It's the inflation cycle where we continue to see a moderation in inflation, interest rate reductions, and hopefully the US elections does not disrupt that. It sets a good backdrop for all these structural reforms to add into that positivity that we've seen. And to the Deputy Finance Minister's point, we spoke with 15, 20 offshore investors. None of them was negative on SA. But it seems as if they're still waiting for US elections before they can participate in a meaningful way. So let's just hope the US elections do not disrupt. That said, I think we have to be bold in terms of the reforms that we need. 2% is not just good enough. We need something much more higher for us to be able to reduce the unemployment rates.
But as the Chief Economist of Rand Merchant Bank, what do you mean by the US elections? You hope they know they don't disrupt things. What would disruption look like?
Yeah,
okay.
So it is a Trump win. We have learned from 2016 to 2018. He has already pronounced in terms of what he's looking for, 10% tariffs on imports, 60% on Chinese imports. China is not going to stand and just do nothing. They will respond. So we will see a trade war between the US and China erupt again, which in 2016 to 2018 has led to a slowdown in global trade volumes, which ultimately lead to slower economic growth. And as a small open economy, we need the global economy to grow for us to grow. So
Sure.
that's the...
Sure,
Yeah.
Which was going to be my closing point, to say that when the giants or the elephants do go at each other potentially, and should they what do you want to call it? Should they sneeze? That when the rest of us do catch the flu, we have got adequate vaccines internally or medication internally in terms of some of the things that we can do ourselves to insulate ourselves to the best degree and to help us in our health standing. But colleagues, it is on that note that we're going to wrap up this conversation today. We do trust that you have enjoyed your time here. I do know that there's various interviews that have been arranged. Minister, basically that potentially means, and the colleagues, that potentially means that the talking is not done for you as yet. But for the rest of you, thanks so much for your time, and till we meet again. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.